Episode of Witty CFB, we'll be discussing the headliner for Friday night, which is number 24 Illinois traveling to Nebraska. Now, this is Illinois' first ranked game since 2022. It's Bret Bielema's fourth year, and they're off to an incredible start. Now, I find this matchup intriguing for a couple reasons. I think, in first, and talking about on Illinois' side of the ball, I think for the most part, when you look at this Illinois program, you know, the one thing that Illinois is going for them is they have a really consistent defense. I mean, they don't give up too many big plays. They, the secondary solid. And quite frankly, in terms of Nebraska's schedule, I think this is the first legitimate test that they really have. Now, I was on this show a couple weeks ago, and I pretty much flat out said I think Nebraska is going to whoop Colorado. And that's exactly what happened because that matchup was a nightmare for Colorado. But I think when you look at this matchup a little differently, I do think that Illinois does have some weapons and can contend with Nebraska. However, I do think for a multitude of reasons, which I'll allude to, that they'll end up winning. But I do think this game's going to be a lot closer than we expect. Now, I'll be the first one to say I think a lot of people, when they think of Bret Bielema, they think of primarily his time at Arkansas, where he kind of fell flat for a good 4 seasons. Then he was at Wisconsin, and then he was at Wisconsin before that, and then he kind of bounced around the NFL in between the Arkansas job and the Illinois job. So first things first, you got to give him a lot of credit. I mean, he's gone 21-19 thus far, $6 million salary. So he's about ninth in the Big Ten in terms of salary, and they were ranked as high as 14 back in 2022. And when you look at this program too, the real reason that they're ranked, aside from being 3-0, is they knocked off Kansas and pulled off the upset there. But I think a couple of things I want to add about that game before we really get into it. I think for starters, Kansas really played a sloppy game. I mean, they had four turnovers and only won by one possession. So I think that's the first start. And also, I think it's important to add for context that Kansas also lost to UNLV too. So I guess to an extent it does take that away from it a little bit. But at the same time, Lance Leopold is a legit coach. He just got a big extension this year. They still have a lot of the same weapons that they did last year too. So I do think that there needs to be some credit there. But at the same time, the one thing that Illinois is going to have to do if they have any chance of beating Nebraska is they got to find a way to get pressure on Raiola. The one thing I've noticed when I've been watching Nebraska the past couple weeks is, Raiola is a very consistent quarterback. He's poised. He hasn't made many mistakes. He's trusted his offensive line. And right now, it's really all coming together for him. When I think of this Nebraska Cornhuskers team, the word that comes to mind is competent and consistent. The only, I said this in my preview a couple months ago, but my biggest concern for Nebraska going into this year was, for starters, the secondary is a little bit younger. But also, I think obviously the big question mark was just, how would Raiola respond being in this spot? And so far, he's been excellent. I think he's done everything you can possibly ask him to do. He has taken on a leadership role. He's finding his playmakers. His completion percentage is a little over 70. So if you're Matt Rule, I'd be over the moon with him right now. And I even talked about his history. Transforming programs like Baylor and Temple and whatnot too. So, the history and the consistency has always been there, but for him to so far turn it around this quickly, and they also do have a really solid schedule in terms of not too many hard, difficult matchups as well. So as I look here, they're 8.5 point favorites here, so that does make sense. And when you really think about this too, I mean, there's a couple of things. I do think both these teams are well coached teams, very experienced. I do think it's going to be one of those games where this game is really going to be fought in the trenches. And like I said, Illinois is going to have to find a way to get pressure on Raiola. I mean, have we seen some glimpses here and there of Raiola having quote unquote freshman moments? Sure. And we saw it. We saw it. This week with against Texas A&M with DJ Lagway. They're freshman quarterbacks are going to have freshman moments, and we haven't really seen as many of those kind of moments as you would anticipate. Which for the Cornhusker faithful, of course, is great to see. But it does kind of make you wonder, when is that game going to happen? Because I mean, obviously, you want to play 12, 14 games as great as you can, but there are going to be a couple hiccups in the road. And when I look at this Illinois game, I do think it could be, you know, it could be difficult too because in one regard, Illinois, it's difficult. It's difficult to get a read on them because they have proven that they can get turnovers on defense. They really haven't played anybody too overly good, other than Kansas. So we will give them the credit for that win as well. And I think also what this matchup is really a testament to is this is going to be Nebraska's 400 straight consecutive sellout against a really quality Illinois team. So I do think this is definitely 100% worthy of it being in the national spotlight too, especially it being a Friday night game where, if this game was sandwiched in between a, Saturday at 3:30 slot or maybe a a night Big Ten game, I think it could overshadowed by an Ohio State game or a Michigan game or anything like that too. So I do think for both of these teams, this up to this point, this will be the most important game they play, and probably for a while too. Now, I do think going into this year, Bielema was definitely under some pressure too because I think for the most part, Illinois has been pretty consistent with being patient with coaches. I mean, you go back and you think of the Ron Zooks and you think of Lovie Smiths, who are both great guys, leaders and men, guys you would want to go have a beer with, but at the same time, the results just simply weren't on the field. And I do think if Illinois can kind of turn this all around, this could be the season where, maybe they do climax and get to 8 wins or 9 wins or something like that too. But at the same time, we even in the previews of the Big Ten, I mean, there's no more divisions anymore. You're going up against USC now. You're going up against UCLA now. You're going up against Oregon now. So the cards are already stacked against Illinois. And when you think of kind of the expectations for this program, I mean, I think a lot of Illinois fans would agree, and I would love to hear their comments on this, that if Bret Bielema can consistently get this team to 6 to 8 wins in a really tough Big Ten, I would say he'd probably have a job there the rest of his life. If that's what he wanted to do. Now, granted, I mean you are competing with some of the other schools. You have other schools coming up and up, particularly in the FCS division. You also have Northern Illinois, who had an incredible upset against Notre Dame this a couple weeks ago. So I do think it really is all coming together too. But what I ultimately see in this matchup is you have two teams who are disciplined, who are greatly who are coached very well. I do think the defensive lines are both going to be causing some havoc, and I do anticipate on the Illinois side, I'm going to expect some disguised blitzes, some different coverage schemes, and I do think this is really going to be a testament of to what degree can Raiola really handle the big spotlight too. Now I do think versus Colorado he did a great job and all that, but for the most part, the identity of this Nebraska team is gonna really be that defense, and Raiola really is going to be the one to complement all that. So with that said, I do think that this is certainly a game on my radar. And when you have the media and all of them are all going to be talking about this game too. But when I look at this game, I do think this really is going to come down to the front seven. Who's going to be able to control the trenches? Which defensive line is going to be able to get more pressure? And in those final 5-6 minutes of the game, who's going to have control of the ball and who's going to get the last possession? Because waving my crystal ball right now, I anticipate this be really coming down to the fourth quarter with Nebraska winning just by a little bit. But don't sleep on this Illinois team. Bret